Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 9th video interview, which is part of the series ECMI Conversations with Experts. Each episode, we invite a prominent expert in the field of minority studies to discuss a specific topic with one of the ECMI researchers. In this case, it is me, Ljubica Djordjević. I'm senior researcher at the ECMI and head of Justice and Governance Cluster, and I'm delighted to welcome today Professor Igor Lakić from Montenegro, with whom I would like to talk about the status of the languages which emerged from the Serbo-Croatian and the puzzle between official language and minority language. I'm really delighted, Professor Lakić, to have you here on Zoom. Professor Lakić comes from Podgorica. He is a full professor and dean of the Faculty of Philology. His interest goes in discourse analysis, general analysis, English syntax, and sociolinguistic, and especially this aspect, sociolinguistic, is why I invited Professor Lakić, because Professor Lakić was also member of the Council for Codification of the Montenegrin Language, and actually Professor Lakić is also member of the COMEX, which we all know so well. It is Committee of Experts under the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages. We could have this conversation, Professor Lakić and me, in our language or languages, both talking in each dialect and understand us very well. If we would invite colleagues from Croatia or Bosnia or Serbia, we could also have a very good workshop in our common language. But this is not so in the legal aspects, and official legal politics are different. So this is what I actually wanted to talk to you, Igor, about this dual realities between normative aspects of legal and linguistic situation in the Balkans and the linguistic situation where people live totally perfect, understand each other. As a starter, could you please tell us something about the linguistic situation and the puzzle, whether we in the former Yugoslavia, apart from Slovenia and North Macedonia, speak one or more languages, and what is the language situation there?
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity to talk about this issue. I've been involved in this issue for a couple of decades, I think even more, but as you put it yourself, we do speak the same language. From the linguistic point of view, this is definitely the same language. So if we start from some research, such as the research of Ranko Bugarski from Belgrade and Radovan Katicic from Zagreb, we can discuss the issue of the identity of the language from 3 points of view, or from 3 aspects. The first aspect is a structural aspect. What is the structure of a dialect or a language or whatever you call it? So in terms of phonology, morphology, the structure of words, syntax, the structure of sentence, it is obvious that all these 4 varieties, and I call varieties, and I'll explain why, belong to the same language. Yes, there are some slight differences, but differences are so few that you cannot really speak about the different languages. Snežana Kordić, in her book Language and Nationalism, says that in order to have different languages, the level of understanding should be below 80%. And it is obvious that when we talk to each other, that the level of understanding is 100%. Perhaps in some situations a bit lower, but close to 100%, definitely. So this first aspect, the structure of the language, it's obviously clear that it's the same language in terms of its structure. The second aspect is the aspect referring to the development of the language. If you go to diachronic research or the development of the language, you can also conclude that these 4 varieties originate from the same source. So these two aspects are linguistic aspects, and both of them show that it is, from the linguistic point of view, the same language. The third aspect is the sociolinguistic aspect, which allows every nation to call its language the way they want it, after the name of the nation. And that's where the problems start, actually, in the region, because it is a symbolic role of the language in one society. And, you know, with the disintegration of the country, we got 4 different languages arising from the former Serbo-Croatian. So it's one entity, but unfortunately, the disintegration of the country, the political reasons, the creation of new states, somehow pushed people to decide to call the languages Serbian, Montenegrin, Bosnian, and Croatian. And it's normally expected in situations like ours. Somehow languages are an expression of a national identity, one of the crucial aspects of national identity. And that's why we had the interventions regarding the name of the language. But the name itself does not necessarily mean that these are different languages. So now we have, Serbo-Croatian has always been so-called polycentric language, which means one language but different centers. And now we have actually 4 different standards of that language: Serbian, Croatian, Bosnian, and Montenegrin. There have been interventions in order to, especially in Croatia, I would say, to introduce new words, to make the language a bit different, and to prove that it is different from other varieties. But somehow, at least here in Montenegro, being exposed to Croatian through cable TVs and media, we accept some of these words, and still we understand them, although they're newly invented. There have been some other attempts to change the language. For example, in Montenegro, there was this attempt to make the language as archaic as it used to be like 100 years ago, which hasn't been accepted by the majority population. In Bosnia, there is this trend to introduce or reintroduce the words of Turkish origin. In Serbia, there is this strong insistence on using Cyrillic as an expression of, let's say, the Serbian identity, although Cyrillic is not Serbian only. We all taught Cyrillic in schools, and the Cyrillic script is my first script, the first script that I learned. And now when I read, I don't even pay attention whether a text is in Cyrillic or Latin script. So these are just the attempts to prove that this language has somehow a separate identity. And I would say it's just a result, as I said before, of the political developments in the last 3 decades or so.
Yeah, it's interesting that although people perfectly understand each other with the breakup of Yugoslavia and creation and adoption of new constitution, every new state put a lot of pressure on asserting own identity also through language. And then you have in Croatia and in Serbia, respectively, that Croatian is official language, and in Serbia, that Serbia is official language. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, there is this trilingualism parties because of the status of constituent peoples. In Montenegro, there was also very interesting constitutional provision, unclear about the status, because it said that Montenegrin is official language, but then other languages are in official use. So it brings a lot of uncertainty and clarity about the language situation. So somehow this has this division, even only on the name or on the status, has important implication of the legal status of languages, but what is more important, of speakers, that people, which has important also implications on the official use and the right to use own language before the authorities, or also has an important implication on education. So can you tell me something about these legal or political aspects of the now, once the state and the language are fragmented, suddenly some varieties or some languages are official and some are smaller value, or so how it goes?
Well, sometimes we have funny situations, but as you mentioned, in Montenegro, we have Montenegrin as an official language, and Albanian, Serbian, Bosnian, and Croatian are in official use. But there is a legal difference between these two terms. In the Council of Europe, we use official and co-official. So co-official is the same as in official use, which means the lower level of the official status, because co-official means that a certain language, let's say Albanian in Montenegro, is used in the territories or in the municipalities where the majority population makes a significant share in the overall the Albanian population makes a significant share in the overall population, which means that Albanian is an official use in Tuzi, in the municipalities of Tuzi, in the municipality of Ulcin, in the municipality of Plav, and Gusinje in the north, because there is a significant share of population belonging to the Albanian nationality. So there is this clear difference, and we can say that in Montenegro, only Montenegrin is official, but the other three, Bosnian, Croatian, and Serbian, are co-official or in official use. But you know, when you say Serbian, for example, in Montenegro, it's not the Serbian spoken in Serbia, it's the same language spoken in Montenegro. And I'll give you my own example. I say, or I call my language Montenegrin. And my best friend, whom I've known all my life since we were 7, he says his mother tongue is Serbian. And we grew up in the same neighborhood. We're still the best friends and everything. We speak exactly the same language. We just call it differently. So that's why I say the name is one thing. It's a symbolic, let's say, label for your language. But in reality, in terms of linguistics, pure linguistics, it's still the same language. You know, I was in Austria maybe 5 or 6 years ago as a rapporteur for Austria for the Charter, and we met there Brandenburg Croatians. And the Croatians in Austria speak this archaic form of Croatian, maybe like 100 years ago. I understood everything. We communicated without any problems. That is another proof that it is the same language, because the communicative function of the language is crucial. If you can communicate in a language that obviously is the same language, when you come to the situation that you need a translator or an interpreter, well, then we can speak about the same language. If you make a comparison with Slovenian and Macedonian, they are definitely different languages. For example, in terms of structure, Macedonian doesn't even have the cases or the inflections that we have in our language, in our common language. You still don't understand everything, and you need some effort to understand. The same goes for Slovenian. It's probably even more difficult for us to understand Slovenian. Not that we don't understand it at all, but still, according to their structure, vocabulary, and everything, they are different languages. But these 4, I claim it, and I have always claimed it, belong to the same language.
Yeah, but about this official status, I doubt that if I would come with my Serbian from Serbia and try to address in oral communication any of institution in Montenegro or in either of these countries, that someone would say, "Oh, go back! I don't understand you. You don't use official language." On the other hand, I did a checkup in Serbia and in Croatia of official translators and interpreters, and they are really registered within the Ministry of Justice, or that you can really have a list of interpreters for all these languages in the country. So there is also in Bosnia and Herzegovina, there is a whole language departments translating, some say, or modifying the versions of official documents from one variety to the other variety. Or, for example, in Serbia, there were also case log before the courts in Novi Pazar, in Sandžak region, because of the use of need to use interpreters when people address court in Bosnia, which is really from the real perspective or the real life perspective really comes as absurdity. Although on the one hand, the right to use own language and or variety is something what is indisputable, and no one should be forced to use other official language. On the other hand, like using an interpreter might be really absurd in this context. Or the what is also very problematic, the use of the language in education, in terms of separating school, when people, especially in Bosnia or in the Sandžak region, where people mostly speak the same language as you described with your friend, that you and your friend, one go to Montenegrin and the other to Serbian school, which is luckily not the case in Montenegro yet. So I think you don't have this separation of classes. You all learn this Montenegrin / Serbian / Bosnian. I think that's how you solve the issue in education. But in some other countries, children actually speaking almost the same variant because of the local community, speak their own vernacular. They are then divided into classrooms depending on their official language or standard language, which actually is more divisive than actually constructive for the communities. So what is your experience with this negative effects of this clear division between varieties or languages?
It's absurd, and I would say I strongly disapprove of such situations. I think we've been a bit more flexible in Montenegro because we don't, not that I know of any interpreters or translators translating from Serbian or Croatian into Montenegrin. I haven't been aware of such practices so far. So if you come to Montenegro, for example, and address anybody in the administration in your variety in the Serbian language, let's say, there wouldn't be any problem. There is the situation when people applying for citizenship in Montenegro, they have to provide a proof that they know the official language, the Montenegrin language, even if they come from the neighboring countries. But that in such situations, we are very flexible because we don't really test those people by giving them a written test and asking them grammar. We just talk to them for about 2-3 minutes to be aware that they really come from the region, they speak the language. So even if it's a Bosnian or Serbian or Croatian variety, it doesn't matter. Certificates are easily issued. And you mentioned also the situation in schools where the subject in schools is called Montenegrin. It's not slash, but it's Montenegrin dash Serbian, Bosnian, Croatian. So in the order of the number of speakers, which means it shows actually that Montenegrin is the official languages and the other three are in official use by using this dash and commas. But in schools, children read Serbian authors, Bosnian authors, Croatian authors. At the Faculty of Philology, where I'm the dean, we have two departments, which is a little bit absurd: Montenegrin language and South Slavic literatures. So it's plural, which means that they do study Montenegrin as the official language, but with all the literatures, Croatian, Serbian, Bosnian, Montenegrin, and so on. The same goes for the Serbian department. There's Serbian language and South Slavic literatures in plural. So that's the situations we have now. That's why I said that we are a bit more flexible. We don't stick to some strict rules, and we don't really try to discourage people to use their own variety. That has not been the case. Perhaps it's because Montenegro was the last to introduce Montenegrin as the official language among these four states. It was back in 2007 when we adopted the new constitution. Of course, this situation, Article 13 of the constitution reads that Montenegrin is the official language, that Albanian, Serbian, Bosnian and Croatian are in official use. And what I think that is very, very good is that the constitution puts an equality mark between Latin and Cyrillic script, because the constitution reads that Latin and Cyrillic script are equal. So that's a good approach, but we cannot, if somebody objects to that, we cannot blame any linguists because the politicians agreed on that. So that was the agreement of all the political parties in the parliament at the time, and that's what we stick to. But to be honest, I just don't think that there should be any problems regarding these four languages in any of the four states, because, as I said at the beginning, it's definitely the same language.
Yeah, and then what is also here, the message is more flexibility is welcome, and in terms that there should be found some more also on the legal level, more nuanced approach, and not this bipolar official language, minority language, where these varieties or languages really you cannot compare, let's say, relationship between Serbian and Montenegrin, or Serbian, Croatian, or Bosnian, as with Serbian and Hungarian, or I don't know, any other language which has no linguistic link. So you cannot put, because this is also with the language charter, the language policy is official. So policies should be adapted to the language situation. And my sense is that these language policies and also legal provisions on languages are not, in the case of these four languages or varieties, adapted to the language situation and the needs of people, and that there is no this balance between the need to protect all of these languages and varieties and on the other hand to acknowledge that people can understand each other, and that languages can also be bridges between these people, and not to make a division lines. And along this line, I also found a very interesting provision in Slovakia, where actually Czech language, notwithstanding the status of minority language, has this, let's say, access to the official communication in terms that everyone can address Slovak authorities in Czech language, both written and in oral, and there is no need for interpretation or translation. Or, for example, in Scandinavia, there is this language convention, where Scandinavian languages are mutually recognized. And I think that something like this would be very welcome in our region as well. But I'm afraid that we are not so far. But this is also the purpose and the message of this video, that actually we should search for some more flexible approaches. And then we come to the next question, and it is about the committee of expert position. How you, from the perspective of committee of experts, when you come to this linguistically and legally complex region, how you deal with this issue of these languages? Because I also sense is that committee of experts also follows this straight situation, official language, minority language. Even committee of experts supported minority protection for Bosnian, Croatian, and even Serbian in Montenegro, whereas then Serbian representatives said, no, we don't want a minority status for our language. So can you tell us something about this perspective from the committee of experts?
Yes. And in order to proceed with that, I just want to say that these four standard varieties, Serbian, Croatian, Bosnian, and Montenegrin, belong to the same dialect. So they're not even different dialects. They're varieties, so below dialect. Because the standard versions are all Stockavian dialects.
Yeah.
So but these varieties have been raised to the level of languages, I would say, more in political terms rather than linguistic terms. So,
but with some implications. So serious this status has implications. Yes. So how we can deal with this
on the charter? Because the charter says that the languages that should be protected should not belong to the same language or to the same dialects of the same language. And that's why I started with the dialect. And these four belong even to the same dialect. So what happened? We had discussions in the committee. The thing is that we need, because we protect languages and we observe the opinion of the speakers, not the states, let's say. So yes, the state recognizes some languages and as minority languages. And I will give you again the example of Montenegro. In the first round of our visits to Montenegro, because we visit every country every 3 years to see the situation in the country. In the first round, Montenegro had only Albanian and Romanian as minority languages. And that was the situation where it was easy for the committee because these are completely two different languages. At that point, Croatian speakers, Bosnian speakers, and Serbian speakers said that they didn't ask for any protection because these languages are mutually easily understandable, and they didn't ask for any protection. In the second round, the speakers asked for the protection under Part 2 of the Charter, and that's what the committee had to accept because it's the opinion of the speakers. We followed the wishes of the speakers. We are aware of the situation in our region. We are aware these are practically the same language from the linguistic point of view, but obviously the speakers themselves say the same, more or less, but we protect them rather as an expression of national and cultural identity of the people who speak those languages. And that's how we have accepted it. So it's a kind of a, I would say, borderline between what should and should not be accepted, you know. So if the speakers say, that's my language, I want protection for that language, that's what we accept. The same will go for Bunjevački in Serbia, because the Croatian Minister of Foreign Affairs protested because of the recognition of Bunjevački as a separate language. Even the Croatian community in Vojvodina, I think, protested. But we have to take into consideration the opinion of the speakers, and the committee looks into Bunjevački as a minority language in Serbia. So that's the situation. So
it's
that
also,
probably
I think,
explains how we, look into things.
Yeah. So I think it's also under Part 2. So Bunjevački.
Yes, Bunjevački is Part 2 language.
Yeah, good. But this is also interesting to, although the situation with these four varieties is very somehow striking, it is maybe not so unique in Europe as we thought. So there is also with Bulgarian and Macedonian, there is an issue which it has been solved on a totally different level, whereas Bulgarian authorities said, no, there is no Macedonian language. Also, I know that Ukrainian and Ruthenians, or Poland and Polish and Silesian, or so, there are some kind of language clashes where actually there is opposition to independence, or where is the line between dialect and language, notwithstanding this old statement that language is dialect with army and navy. But it's very interesting that this general approaches, so strict approaches, are maybe not suitable to all language situations, and that we should really search for some more flexible and nuanced approach to the language issue, also from the perspective of comics. And so somehow to acknowledge the language as an asset, and also dialect and also vernacular, but on the other hand, not to go to 0-0 or win 0-0 situations. So we need to search for more proactive and more innovative approaches to language situation in this kind of gray zone, and when the differences between varieties are not so evident.
You're right. So every situation in the committee is considered separately. So we cannot, decide on the situation in our region based on something else, somewhere else. So this situation is specific. We don't apply it in other situations. There are many different situations around Europe. For example, there is a language called Meänkieli in Sweden, which is actually a variety of Finnish, but it's called Meänkieli, and it's treated as a separate language in Sweden, for example. Also in Sweden, there is the language called Älvdalian, which was not recognized by the Swedish authorities. The Swedish authorities claimed to the committee that it's a dialect of Swedish. And when we visited this community up in the north of Sweden, they wanted to show us that it is a different language. And they decided to speak their language and asked the Swedish interpreters to interpret it into English for us. And the Swedish interpreters said, no, we don't understand a single word. And that's where the role of the committee is also important, because it's the language which is not recognized by the state, but the minority asks for its recognition and for its protection. And then we had to talk to the Swedish authorities to recognize this language. It takes years, it does take years, but the committee protects these languages, and this is an especially endangered language. And now we are already reaching the point where the Swedish authorities are recognizing the status of Älvdalian as a separate language. So the role of the committee is very important. We have helped a lot of languages. Sometimes, as I said, it takes years or maybe decades to do something, to make some progress, but our crucial role is to protect these languages, regional and minority languages, and to promote their use in private and public life in any society, in any state.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Lakić, for this very inspiring interview and talk. I thank also to our viewers for time and interest. We will be following this very interesting topic also in future within the Justice and Governance cluster, but also for other interesting topics covered by ECMI. I warmly invite you to follow our website, but also us on our social media channels. And thank you very much. Enjoy your day.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak here.